A blind dachshund was losing hope, until a little kid did something unbelievable. The cold November rain beat against the windows of Oak Valley Animal Shelter, creating a melancholic rhythm that seemed to echo the sadness permeating the place. In the farthest corner of the special care room, curled up on a worn blanket, lay the most difficult case the shelter had ever faced. Max, a reddish-brown dachshund who should have been full of life and energy, was practically motionless. His eyes, permanently closed by a severe infection that had stolen his sight weeks ago, no longer shed tears, but the sadness in his small body was palpable. He had stopped eating 5 days ago, and his body, naturally elongated and low, now seemed even more fragile, with each rib visible beneath his dull coat. Lisa Morgan, the veterinarian in charge of the shelter for 18 years, watched Max through the observation room glass. She had seen hundreds of difficult cases, but there was something about Max that haunted her in a unique way. The dachshund had arrived 2 weeks earlier, rescued from a neglect situation where he had lived trapped in a dirty cage for months. The eye infection was already advanced when he was found, and despite the medical team's best efforts, his vision could not be saved. But it wasn't just the blindness that was killing Max, it was the trauma, the deep depression that had consumed him. He had completely withdrawn from the world, refusing food, water, and any form of affection or interaction. Attempts at force feeding caused so much stress that the team feared the procedure might kill him faster than starvation. That Tuesday morning, Lisa called an emergency meeting with her team. Max's blood tests showed critical signs of malnutrition and dehydration. His glucose levels were dangerously low, and his immune system was collapsing. The veterinary team had tried everything within established protocols, but nothing worked. Mark Sullivan, the shelter coordinator, presented the cold statistics. Max had lost 40% of his body weight. His chances of survival, even with aggressive medical intervention, were less than 10%. The room fell silent as everyone processed what these numbers meant. Jennifer Costa, one of the most experienced veterinary technicians, spoke the words no one wanted to hear. In cases where an animal showed 0 will 2 live, where suffering clearly outweighed any possibility of quality of life, the most humane option was euthanasia. It was a decision the shelter never made lightly, but sometimes it was the final act of compassion they could offer. Lisa found herself unable to accept this conclusion. Something inside her insisted that Max's story shouldn't end this way. She asked for time, just 1 week, to try unconventional approaches. The team reluctantly agreed, concerned about unnecessarily prolonging suffering, but respecting Lisa's experience and intuition. That afternoon, as Lisa made her rounds through the shelter, she heard a familiar voice outside. It was Tommy Chen, an 8-year-old boy who visited the shelter every day after school. Tommy had his own story that had deeply touched everyone at the shelter. 6 months ago, Tommy had lost his grandmother, with whom he lived and who was his only close family. The woman had died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving the boy in the care of a loving foster family, but still dealing with a devastating loss. Tommy's grandmother had been a dachshund breeder for 30 years, and the boy had grown up surrounded by the small, elongated dogs she loved so much. After his grandmother's death, Tommy had become a volunteer at the shelter, a way to connect with the happy memories he had of her. He spent hours reading to the dogs, brushing their coats, and simply offering companionship. The shelter staff had noticed that Tommy seemed to have a special gift with traumatized animals, a patience and empathy that went beyond his young age. Lisa watched Tommy through the window, playing gently with a rescued beagle that had arrived the previous week. She saw how the boy moved, always slowly and deliberately, never making sudden movements that might scare the animals. She saw how he spoke in low, reassuring tones, creating a space of safety around him. And then, an idea began to form in Lisa's mind. It was unconventional, potentially controversial, and certainly not in any veterinary medicine manual. But there was something about Tommy's intuitive gentleness, combined with his own experience with dachshunds, that made Lisa wonder if perhaps, just perhaps, he might be the key to reaching Max. Lisa called Tommy for a private conversation in her office. She carefully explained about Max, his blindness, his trauma, and his refusal to connect with the world. She watched the boy's face as she spoke, seeing sadness, but also something more, our recognition, an understanding that came from his own experience with loss and darkness. "He must be so scared," Tommy said softly, his eyes welling up. "When my grandmother died, I didn't want to talk to anyone either. It felt like if I finally accepted she was gone, it would be like losing her again." Lisa felt a lump in her throat. "Tommy," she said carefully, "I have an idea that might seem strange, but I think you might be the only person capable of helping Max. You understand loss in a way that few adults can, and you have experience with dachshunds. Would you be willing to try spending time with him?" Tommy's response was immediate. "Can I start now?" The team spent the rest of the afternoon preparing a controlled environment for the first meeting. The observation room was reorganized to create a comfortable, quiet space. Cameras were positioned to document the interaction, and safety protocols were established in case Max showed signs of extreme stress. When Tommy entered the room for the first time, Max was in his usual position, curled into a tight ball, his small body trembling slightly. The boy didn't approach immediately. Instead, he sat on the floor several meters away, his back against a wall, and simply began to talk. These weren't words directed at Max specifically. Tommy simply began telling stories about his grandmother, about the dachshunds she raised, about the afternoons he spent helping her care for the puppies. His voice was low, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. He talked about Patches, the first dachshund he had ever known, about how the dog used to sleep curled in his lap while he did homework. For 45 minutes, Tommy talked, and Max remained motionless. But the team watching from the cameras noticed something. Max's ears, which had been flat against his head since he arrived, began to move slightly. Not much, just enough to indicate he was processing the sounds around him. On the second day, Tommy brought something special, a voice recording of his grandmother that he had found on an old phone. In the recording, the woman was calling her dachshunds, using the specific tone and words she always used. Tommy played the audio softly, and for the first time, Max lifted his head slightly. Lisa watched fascinated as Tommy, with an intuition that defied his age, began to create a familiar sound environment for Max. He brought small bells that he shook gently, creating sounds that Max could use to map the space around him. He began to clap softly in different locations, helping the blind dog build a spatial understanding of the room. On the third day, the first miracle happened. Tommy had brought a small piece of cooked chicken, the same kind his grandmother used to give as treats to her dachshunds. He didn't try to place the food near Max directly. Instead, he placed it in his own hand and simply held it there, allowing the aroma to fill the room. Slowly, so slowly it almost didn't seem to be happening, Max's nose began to move. His head lifted a bit more, and then, for the first time in 2 weeks, Max moved voluntarily. Not much, just a few centimeters, but it was directed, purposeful movement. He was following the scent. If this story is touching your heart, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. Tommy remained perfectly still, barely breathing, as Max slowly, so slowly, began to uncurl his body. The dachshund tracked the scent, using his extraordinarily sensitive nose to navigate the dark space that was now his permanent world. It took almost 10 minutes for him to cover the 1-meter distance to where Tommy sat. When Max's nose finally touched Tommy's hand, the boy didn't move. He simply let the dog investigate, sniff, process. And then, with infinite gentleness, Tommy opened his hand, offering the piece of chicken. Max hesitated for a long moment before delicately taking the food. It was the first food he had voluntarily accepted in almost a week. Tears streamed down Lisa's face as she watched from the control room. It was more than a medical victory, it was proof that human connection, especially when coming from someone who deeply understood trauma and loss, could reach where medicine could not. In the following days, a routine was established. Tommy would arrive every afternoon after school, always at the same time, creating a predictability that Max began to anticipate. The boy developed a complex system of sounds, different types of claps, whistles, and words, each with its own meaning in their private language. A certain clapping pattern meant Tommy was entering the room. A specific whistle indicated there was food. A soft word warned that Tommy was about to touch Max. Max responded to this structured communication remarkably. He began to orient himself by the sounds Tommy created, building a mental map of his environment. When Tommy clapped in a specific location, Max learned there was water there. A bell at another point indicated his favorite blanket. Gradually, a private language emerged between the boy and the dog. Max's physical transformation was equally dramatic. With Tommy present, he began to accept food regularly. First small pieces of chicken, then his special kibble, and eventually he was eating complete portions. His weight began to increase, his coat began to shine again, and his energy slowly returned. But it was the emotional transformation that most impressed the shelter staff. Max, who had completely withdrawn from the world, began to show signs of personality. When Tommy entered the room, his ears immediately lifted and he began to wag his long tail. He developed small vocalizations, soft whimpers and low barks, specifically to communicate with Tommy. Tommy, in turn, flourished under the responsibility of caring for Max. The boy's foster family noticed he was laughing more, sleeping better, talking more openly about his feelings regarding his grandmother's loss. There was something deeply therapeutic for both in this connection, two beings dealing with trauma finding healing in each other. In their 6th week together, Tommy had an idea. He brought a long soft rope and, with Lisa's approval, created a guide system for Max. The rope had different textures along its length, smooth in some parts, knotted in others, rough in some sections, each texture providing different information to Max about where he was in space. Tommy taught Max to follow the rope, using food rewards and verbal encouragement. The Dachshund learned quickly that different textures corresponded to different destinations. A smooth section led to his water bowl, a part with knots led to his blanket. A rough section indicated the door where Tommy always entered. The system worked beyond all expectations. Max began to navigate the entire special care wing with growing confidence. He still couldn't see, but he was no longer lost in the dark. He had his personalized navigation system, created by an 8-year-old boy who understood that just as he had needed structure and predictability after losing his grandmother, Max needed the same things to feel safe again. The story of Max and Tommy began to spread beyond the shelter walls. A local news story about their unusual friendship went viral on social media, touching hearts across the country. People wrote from everywhere, sharing their own stories of animals that had been healed through love and patience. Donations began pouring into Oak Valley Shelter, specifically directed toward the program Lisa decided to establish, Children Heal Hearts, a program that would match young people dealing with trauma or loss with rescued animals that needed special kinds of care and patience. Tommy and Max had become the involuntary ambassadors of an entirely new approach to animal rehabilitation. As months passed, the bond between Tommy and Max only grew stronger. The boy visited daily, and Max clearly waited for him, becoming more animated at the specific time Tommy normally arrived. They developed play routines adapted to Max's blindness, games involving sounds and smells instead of sight. Tommy created a special adventure park for Max using objects with different textures and sounds. Plastic bottles hung that made noise when touched, cardboard boxes with different openings to explore, tunnels made of blankets that Max could navigate using his keen sense of smell. The Dachshund proved surprisingly athletic and playful when he had the right tools to interact with his world. Tommy's foster family, the Johnsons, had been following Max's progress with growing interest. They had seen how caring for the Dachshund had helped Tommy process his grief and find joy again. One afternoon, after several family discussions, they approached Lisa with a proposal. "We want to adopt Max," said Sarah Johnson, Tommy's foster mother. "We know he has special needs, but Tommy has already created an entire system for him. And honestly, we think Tommy needs Max as much as Max needs Tommy." Lisa was moved but cautious. Max had made incredible progress, but he was still a dog with permanent visual impairment who would require care and adaptations for the rest of his life. She spent several weeks working with the Johnson family, educating them about Max's needs, making home visits to ensure the environment would be safe and suitable. The Johnson home was carefully adapted. Tommy supervised every change, using the knowledge he had gained about how Max navigated the world. They installed different textures on the floor in different rooms: rough rugs in Tommy's bedroom, smooth tiles in the kitchen, soft carpet in the living room. Each texture served as a landmark for Max. They created sound trails. Small bells hung in different locations that Max could use for guidance. Max's water bowl had a small fountain that made a constant, soft sound. His bed had a small radio that played classical music quietly, creating an auditory reference point he could always use to find his safe place. If you're loving this incredible journey, leave a like and share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. The adoption day was emotional for the entire shelter staff. Max, now at a healthy weight, shiny coat, and confident personality, left the shelter with Tommy by his side. The boy held the special leash they had developed together, and Max walked confidently, his tail wagging constantly. The adaptation to the Johnson home was surprisingly smooth. Max quickly learned the layout of his new house, using the system Tommy had created. He discovered he could use odors for navigation too. The smell of coffee always came from the kitchen in the morning. Lavender came from the Johnsons' bedroom, and Tommy's room always had the comforting smell of books and colored pencils. Tommy took full responsibility for Max's care, with appropriate parental supervision. He woke up earlier every morning to feed Max, took him on careful walks using the guide system they had developed, and spent hours every afternoon playing and training with him. Max developed an unexpected talent. He could see through his extraordinary sense of hearing and smell in ways that constantly surprised the family. He learned to detect when Tommy was sad or anxious, pressing his warm body against the boy and offering silent comfort. He seemed to instinctively know when Tommy needed company versus when he needed space. Tommy's school heard about Max and invited the boy to give a presentation about animals with special needs and the importance of patience and empathy. Tommy, who had previously been shy and withdrawn, spoke confidently to his class, Max by his side, demonstrating how the Dachshund navigated the world using sounds and smells. The presentation was so well received that the school developed a disability awareness program, with Tommy and Max as the main advocates. They visited classrooms, teaching children about empathy, adaptation, and the fact that being different doesn't mean being less capable. Max became something of a local celebrity. Stories about the miracle Dachshund and his 8-year-old best friend appeared in newspapers and news programs. But for Tommy and Max, fame didn't matter. What mattered was the connection they had formed, the unbreakable bond between a boy who had lost his grandmother and a dog who had lost his sight. 1 year after the adoption, Lisa from Oak Valley Shelter visited the Johnson family for a routine follow-up. What she found left her speechless. Max was unrecognizable from the broken and hopeless dog that had arrived at the shelter. He ran through the Johnsons' yard, carefully fenced and obstacle-free, with confidence and joy, responding to Tommy's commands with precision. More impressive was seeing how Max and Tommy had developed their own complex language. Tommy could indicate directions, warnings, or encouragement through different patterns of claps, whistles, or words. Max responded with his own vocalizations, creating a genuine dialogue between them. Tommy had begun keeping a journal about his experiences with Max, documenting techniques and insights that could help other people with blind animals. At just 9 years old, he had become an unofficial expert in caring for visually impaired animals, his knowledge born from pure love and careful observation. The Children Heal Hearts program at Oak Valley Shelter had grown tremendously, inspired by Tommy and Max's success. Dozens of children dealing with trauma, loss, or emotional difficulties were matched with rescued animals that needed special kinds of patience and care. The results were consistently remarkable. Both the animals and the children flourished through these connections. On a particularly significant day, Tommy took Max back to the shelter to visit. It was the 2-year anniversary since Max had arrived there, blind, traumatized, and giving up on life. The staff organized a small celebration, and Tommy gave a speech that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "When my grandmother died, I felt like I was in the dark," Tommy said, his voice clear and confident. "And when I met Max, he was literally in the dark. But we helped each other find the light again. Not the light you see with your eyes, but the light you feel in your heart." Max taught me that even when you can't see where you're going, if you have someone by your side who believes in you, you can go anywhere. Max, as if understanding the moment, placed his paw on Tommy's leg and gave his characteristic low bark, a sound the team had learned was his way of expressing contentment and love. Comment below. What moment in this story touched you the most? We love hearing from you. Years passed, and Tommy grew, but his bond with Max remained as strong as on the first day. He continued his advocacy work, expanding it to include not only animals with disabilities, but also children facing challenges. He spoke at schools, shelters, and community groups, Max always by his side, a living testament to the power of empathy and patience. When Tommy entered high school, he began volunteering regularly at Oak Valley Shelter, mentoring younger children who were being matched with rescued animals through the program he had inspired. He taught them the techniques he had developed, but more importantly, taught them the fundamental lesson Max had taught him, that healing requires time, patience, and the willingness to be present, even when progress seems impossible. Max, now a senior dog, had slowed physically, but his personality remained vibrant. He still accompanied Tommy in his advocacy activities, still demonstrated to fascinated audiences how a blind dog could navigate the world with confidence and joy. His tail still wagged constantly when Tommy was around, a constant metronome of happiness. The story of Max and Tommy inspired dozens of academic articles about animal therapy, child development, and the healing power of interspecies connections. Universities studied their case, psychologists analyzed their relationship, and veterinarians examined the methods Tommy had developed intuitively. But for those who truly knew Tommy and Max, the academic studies missed the point. It wasn't about science or methodology. It was about two souls who met in their darkest moments and decided to carry the light for each other. It was about a boy who learned that healing others also heals yourself, and a dog who proved that losing one sense doesn't mean losing the ability to live fully. Lisa, now close to retirement, often reflected on the day she had decided to bring Tommy and Max together. It had been the most unconventional decision of her career, one that could have failed spectacularly. But instead, it had created something magical, not just saving two beings, but starting a movement that would transform how animal shelters approached impossible cases. On quiet days, the Johnsons' neighbors could often see Tommy and Max in their fenced yard. The boy, now a tall teenager, still sat on the ground as he did when he was 8 years old, and Max still curled his elongated body next to him. They didn't need words. The comfort they found in each other's presence was more eloquent than any language could express. Tommy's high school teacher once asked the class about their personal heroes, while other students named athletes, celebrities, or historical figures. Tommy spoke about Max, "My hero, he said, is a blind dachshund who taught me that courage in not being afraid. It's continuing to live, love, and trust, even when you can't see the path ahead. The story of Max and Tommy reminds us that healing rarely happens the way we expect. It doesn't come from manuals or protocols, but from the unexpected connections we form with other beings. Connections based on empathy, patience, and the willingness to meet someone where they are, not where we want them to be. They prove that impossible to save animals just need the right person, the right approach, and enough unconditional love to give them reason to try again. And they proved that children dealing with profound loss have extraordinary reserves of compassion and resilience, especially when they have purpose and someone who needs them as much as they need something to fight for. Today, Max spends his days doing what dachshunds do best, chasing carefully interesting smells, sleeping in sunny spots, and mainly, being by Tommy's side. He may not be able to see the boy who saved his life, but he feels his presence in every moment, in every touch, in every whispered word of love and encouragement. And Tommy, now planning to study veterinary medicine and animal psychology in college, carries the lessons Max taught him in every aspect of his life: patience, empathy, the belief that every life has value and that it's never too late to find hope, even in the darkest circumstances. Their journey began in a dim shelter, with a dog giving up on life and a boy lost in his grief. But through their unlikely connection, they found not only healing but purpose. They became advocates, teachers, and inspiration for thousands of people around the world. Their story isn't just about a blind dog who was saved. It's about how love can illuminate even the deepest darkness. It's about how the deepest wounds can sometimes only be healed by helping someone with their own wounds. It's about how an 8-year-old boy saw beyond disability and trauma to the soul that desperately needed someone who simply believed in him. Max and Tommy remind us that miracles happen, not through divine intervention or advanced technology, but through simple and consistent acts of kindness, patience, and unconditional love. They happen when someone refuses to give up, even when all indicators say there's no hope. As the sun sets over the Johnsons' yard, casting long shadows across the grass, Tommy and Max remain together as they always have. The souls who were broken and became whole again, not despite their wounds, but because of the shared understanding that came from them. And in shelters across the country, inspired by their story, traumatized children and animals are being brought together, creating new stories of healing and hope. The legacy of Max and Tommy continues to grow, living proof that sometimes the most unlikely connections produce the most extraordinary results. In their darkest moments, when everything seemed lost, neither Max nor Tommy could have imagined the future that awaited them. But they found each other exactly when they needed each other most, and that connection transformed not only their lives, but countless others inspired by their journey. This is the story of Max, a blind dachshund who was losing hope, and of Tommy, an 8-year-old boy dealing with devastating loss. Together, they prove that when two wounded souls meet with compassion and patience, they can create something brighter than either could achieve alone. If this story inspired you, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share this video so more people can see this incredible story of hope, love, and second chances. Never give up. You never know when your patience and love will make all the difference.